The smell of strong coffee was already filling my kitchen when I first heard the basketball bouncing in the garage next door. That sound became the soundtrack to my new life, in a neighborhood where nobody knew who I was, or why I was hiding behind the curtains. I didn't need much, just a quiet corner, a bit of silence, and space to get used to my own company. My name's Scott. I'm 33, and most days I work in front of a computer, fixing tech issues that never really feel like mine. I do computer maintenance for small businesses, spend a lot of time writing reports, answering calls, and dodging video meetings. I didn't end up here by chance. After years of trying to be the ideal version of myself to please others, the weight finally got too heavy. I ended a long relationship and needed to escape my circle of acquaintances, their judgments, and promises that no longer made sense to keep. I feel like people see me as a closed-off, almost invisible guy. But it's not a fear of living. It's just that resistance of someone who's been burned and prefers to test the water before diving in. Deep down, I'm curious, observant, the kind of person who notices details first and faces later. I discovered that if I pay attention to the sounds, the gestures, the quiet laughter from the yard next door, I can slowly rebuild my own world. So, if you've ever felt out of place, a little lost, or waiting for something different, stick around. Like, subscribe, and come with me to discover how the most ordinary routine can become the starting point for a story that barely seems real. The neighborhood looked like something out of an old movie. Light wooden houses, perfectly manicured. Lawns and tall trees swaying in the wind, filling the late afternoons with shade and movement. From my room, I could see the leaves trembling in the yellow sunlight. Sometimes the neighbor at number 48 would blast music. Always bubblegum pop, those catchy choruses. And I didn't mind. Quite the opposite. I liked feeling that life was pulsing around there. My routine was simple, not to say predictable. I woke up early, before the commotion of kids going to school. The aroma of coffee mingled with the smell of bread from the bakery on the corner. A silent invitation to the start of another day just like the others. Or so I thought. I worked from the living room, laptop always open, headphones blocking out half the world, while the other half reached me through the window pane. When I needed to breathe, I'd go for a walk. I knew every stone on the path, every dog barking behind the gates. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch stairs just to watch the world go by, catch some sun, or pretend to read while trying to guess what story each neighbor carried. The best spot in the house was the backyard. It had a small garden, some neglected herbs, and a wooden bench where I'd hide out in the late afternoons. There, time passed slowly. I'd hear the buzzing of insects, the creaking of the iron gate next door, the sound of Trevor's hose filling. His pool, yeah, Trevor, the next-door neighbor, who seemed to live in a completely different universe than mine. The sound of his laughter would drift over the wooden fence, along with the smell of sunscreen and BBQ on weekends. I'd stay there, invisible, making up excuses not to interact. I'd watch from afar, trying to understand how someone could be so much a part of the world, so comfortable in their own skin, while I felt like an intruder even in my own garden. Every morning, I'd repeat my rituals, water the plants, check emails, adjust my chair before sitting down. Silence was my ally, and time my accomplice. Until that day, my life was a sequence of safe repetitions, with few risks and almost no surprises. Sunday arrived hot and muggy. You could feel the lazy start to the day just by the way the leaves hung still in the air, waiting for a wind that never came. I was trying to focus on a complicated report, but the heat clung to my skin, and the sounds from the pool next door were a constant distraction. Laughter echoing, water splashing, music dancing in the air, all from the other side of the fence. That's when I heard my name in the most unexpected way. "Hey Scott, you alive in there?" It took me a few seconds to confirm it was me. When I looked up, I saw Trevor on the other side of the fence, leaning on one arm, hair dripping, an easy smile, and a tan like someone who never avoids the sun. I always thought he didn't even know my name, but there he was, calling out to the reclusive neighbor. "It's too hot to be cooped up. Come swim with us, man. Just for today, no hiding." My first reaction was the old impulse to refuse. I almost said, "Thanks, I'm busy," but I stopped myself. There was something in the way he said it, in the casual invitation. No pressure, just a chance to step out of my bubble. I looked at my clothes, old shorts, a t-shirt, and saw I had no more excuses. I gave a crooked smile and accepted, promising myself it would be quick. When I crossed the fence, Trevor's world seemed even more distant. Friends sprawled on lounge chairs, a ball floating in the pool, open beer cans, the smell of BBQ, and music with a vacation vibe. He came to meet me, pulled out a chair for me, poured a drink. And suddenly, for the first time since I arrived, I didn't feel like an intruder. The conversation started slowly. Trevor asked about my job, told me about a recent trip along the coast, talked about airport hassles and wanting to explore Alaska someday. I found myself talking more than I expected, telling stories from my hometown, laughing at silly situations, forgetting the weight of silence. When he mentioned that he likes to photograph ordinary daily moments, I felt there was a bridge there, something that connected us effortlessly. We laughed remembering old songs, playfully argued about which 2000s movie was better, until someone threw a ball his way and interrupted our conversation. He apologized, went to play with his friends, but looked back and smiled, as if guaranteeing he'd return. Hours flew by. I remember thinking, as I dried off in the sun, that simple invitation had popped the bubble of my routine in a way I hadn't imagined. It wasn't just the pool, or the cold beer, but the feeling that maybe life could be lighter than I thought. After that day, something changed. I don't know who took the next step, but our interactions became almost natural. Trevor would show up occasionally, knocking on my door with a request. Sometimes he needed help setting up a new router. Other times he'd ask for a hand changing the garden lights. I, who always hid behind excuses, gradually allowed myself to say yes. One night, he brought over a gourmet burger to share and stayed for dinner. We cooked together, listening to a playlist alternating between indie and old-school pop. Between frying onions, he told me stories from the past few years. His travels as a freelance photographer, nights in roadside motels, the places where he found inspiration for his photos. I listened more than I spoke, but little by little, I made room for my own stories, sharing childhood memories, small quirks, and even some silly secrets, like my obsession with lists and organizing things into folders. Slowly, my routine was invaded by these pleasant little interruptions. In the late afternoon, as the sun went down, we'd sit on my porch, having a beer or iced tea, commenting on the street traffic, the annoying dog across the street, or the distant music from some lost party. We'd laugh at our own inside jokes, creating our own codes, as if each encounter added a new layer to the friendship. It wasn't long before I started missing the days when Trevor would disappear, busy with friends or some out-of-town work. I began to pay attention to the details, the way he'd run his hand through his hair when talking about something important, his easy laugh, his laid-back way of joking about everything, even himself. Somewhere between conversations about routers and old TV shows, something in me started to relax. The feeling of always being on the defensive gave way to a kind of curious anticipation. What else will he unknowingly show me? We'd share mundane tasks, fixing a lamp, tidying the garden, installing a new app on his phone, adjusting his bike before a trail ride. The work became an excuse to extend the conversation, laugh about silly problems, share tips, and discover that despite our differences, there was an inexplicable synchronicity. I no longer saw myself as the reclusive neighbor, at least not when Trevor was around. One afternoon, he showed up with a toolbox and stayed until almost nightfall, assembling a bookshelf he'd bought online. The whole process turned into a joke, with screws left over and incomprehensible instructions. In the end, we laughed so much, we almost forgot the time. Trevor said goodbye with a light pat on my back, but lingered for a few extra seconds, as if he wanted to say something but swallowed it silently. This togetherness created a new comfort zone, with blurred lines between neighbors, friends, and maybe something more. The curious thing was that I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I also didn't want that feeling to end. As natural as it seemed, an invisible line still hung between us, a kind of boundary I feared crossing too soon. Sometimes I'd catch myself noticing too much. The way Trevor spoke, the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching, even bizarre details like his awkward way of holding a glass with his left hand. I was afraid of being too obvious, of letting a desire show that, until then, I hadn't had the courage to admit even to myself. The truth was, Behind every laugh and every casual invitation, there was a silent tension. I had a constant fear that I was misinterpreting everything. That for Trevor, this was just friendship, an unlikely partnership between two lonely neighbors with no hidden intentions. What if I crossed the line and ended up destroying everything? Losing that comfortable neutrality gave me chills. I wasn't the only one struggling with doubts. Some nights, Trevor would disappear for days, busy with friends, family, or quick trips. When he came back, he'd be more introspective, looking at the ground before meeting my gaze. In those moments, conversation would be slow to start. I could feel the weight in the air of someone carrying unspoken questions. A clear example came after a barbecue. He stayed by the pool late, quiet, looking at the sky while everyone else had left. I sat beside him, tossed out a casual joke to ease the tension. He smiled, but quickly looked away, nervously fiddling with the edge of the pool, like someone wanting to say something but not knowing how. On those silent days, doubt gnawed at me. Was I just the lonely friend, the practical neighbor who could fix things? Or was there something more, something neither of us could name yet? Even as our interactions grew more natural, the distance grew in the details. When his friends showed up out of nowhere, I felt like an outsider, an element outside the group. I'd pretend to be comfortable, but inside, anxiety would build. Sometimes Trevor would disappear for an entire weekend, and I'd spend the following week trying to feign indifference. Old insecurities resurfaced. That old feeling of being invisible, of not being enough, of desiring what wasn't allowed to be desired. As much as I tried to hide it, sometimes it showed in my eyes or a deeper sigh. Trevor, however, seemed to understand, even without asking. One night, he sent an unexpected text. "You up? Need to talk." My heart pounded, but in the end, it was just a silly car problem. Another excuse for him to show up and occupy my living room for a few hours, laughing at his own blunders. But in the air lingered the feeling that both of us were afraid to go further, to mess with a friendship that seemed too perfect to risk. Even sharing so much, there were doors closed from within, unasked questions, words held deep in our throats. And I, in the midst of this whirlwind, tried to balance the fear of loss with an insatiable desire to discover what exactly Trevor wanted to show me of his world, and if there was, within it, a place for me. The idea of camping came out of nowhere. Trevor showed up at my door one Friday afternoon, carrying a backpack bigger than him, a shirt tied around his waist, his eyes full of that sparkle that always appeared when he was about to do something fun and silly. "Hey Scott, boring weekend. Or adventure. Let's go camping. Found a cool spot. Not many people, just us, some trails, and a lake for swimming." I thought about saying no. I'd already made up 1,000 excuses in my head, from piled up work to unstable weather. But nothing sounded convincing. In that moment, the idea of getting out, breathing different air, and being away from the neighborhood, and everything that reminded me of my own limitations, sounded more tempting than dangerous. I packed my bag not quite knowing what to expect. On the way, quiet music, windows open to the cool wind, Trevor singing the wrong lyrics to an old band song, and me laughing, genuinely laughing, in a rare way. The small towns faded behind us as the sky turned coppery. The campsite was simple, in the middle of a valley near a stream. We set up the tent together, laughing at the confusing instructions, debating who was more useless with stakes, Trevor throwing dirt at each other, and me pretending to complain just to hear him laugh. More. The place was almost pure silence, interrupted only by the sound of running water and leaves softly rustling against each other. When the bonfire got going, I sat next to him, each of us holding a mug of tea. We spoke little, exchanging just enough words to maintain the comfort of the moment. The warmth of the fire mingled with the cold of the night. The conversation flowed differently this time, without noise, with no one else around. Trevor slowly lowered his guard. He talked about his own fears, about feeling like he never quite fit in anywhere. He admitted that, sometimes, he pretended to be confident just so he wouldn't have to confess how much he missed having a safe harbor. I shared my insecurities, my fear of just being an extra in people's lives, of not knowing if I was ready to risk losing a friend for a deeper desire. The sky was packed with stars. I could almost hear my own heart beating, fear and desire mingling. He reached out, picked up a branch, and drew lines in the dirt, not looking at me. "I wouldn't bring you here if I didn't trust you," he murmured, almost as if apologizing for feeling. I felt a shiver, not from cold, but from anticipation. I wanted to seize the courage in that instant, but we just stayed in that electric silence, both knowing that any move would change everything. Later, when it was time to sleep, we realized there was only one double sleeping bag. We laughed at our unpreparedness, but accepted the situation. The space was small. Every movement brushed against the other, but neither of us complained. The night deepened with unfamiliar sounds, the smell of wood, sweat, and grass. I felt Trevor's breath close, sometimes slow, sometimes quick when our arms accidentally touched. I wanted to touch more, to bring my face closer, to discover what was truly there, but I held back, fearing I'd break the spell. Trevor murmured, when I already thought he was asleep. "Sometimes I just wish everything was simpler." I stayed silent, and for the first time, I wished he could read my thoughts with the same talent he had for filling any silence. Time passed slowly. There was no kiss, no grand gesture that night. Just a silent promise, a quiet truth that passed through the shared time in that tight sleeping bag. I felt that something had changed. There was no going back to how things were before, but there was also no path forward without a leap. Deep down, some part of me knew. A different story was being born here. And even if fear still existed, I didn't want to hide anymore. The following week was a mix of anxiety and euphoria. I'd wake up remembering the warmth of Trevor's body beside mine, the whispered words in the early morning, the feeling that everything could be about to change. He went back to his routine, taking photos around the neighborhood, sharing jokes on his phone, but between us, there was something different, an invisible tension that grew with each exchanged message, each casual invitation for a beer. On an ordinary Thursday, the day dragged. I was sitting on the porch, the faint house light illuminating only half the yard, lost in thought, when I heard Trevor's voice approaching the gate. He was alone, coming from the dark streets, steps calm, but eyes restless. "Scott, you there?" he asked, his voice low, almost fumbling in the dark. I nodded, and he sat beside me, resting his elbows on his knees. Silence hung in the air, but this time it was heavy, loaded with expectation. Trevor looked straight ahead, not at me. "Why do you never make the first move?" I was speechless. I felt the weight of his every word, as if they'd been thought about for days and still came out with fear. I searched for an answer somewhere between courage and apprehension. "I'm afraid of messing up," I replied, my voice almost gone. "Afraid of losing you, of looking at you in a way I shouldn't." He laughed, but it was a fragile, rough laugh. He turned, looked deep into my eyes, and spoke with such honesty it hurt. "You think I don't feel the same? You think it's easy for me?" The world seemed to fit into a few seconds. I felt his hand touch mine, hesitant, slowly, his fingers lightly brushing. My whole body awakened at the contact, as if finally waking up after a lifetime of waiting. Neither of us needed to say more. He leaned in fully, his eyes asking permission, and his lips met mine unhurriedly. The touch was soft, different from how I'd imagined it so many times. There was no urgency, just a desire to linger, to discover each other in due time. Our lips sought each other shyly, but also with a hunger for everything that had been held back. The night enveloped our bodies in a warm embrace. Our movements were almost cautious, like someone discovering skin for the first time. I felt Trevor's hands exploring my shoulders, each touch drawing a new map on me. His beard lightly scraped my skin, leaving invisible marks of desire. The world around us disappeared. Only the two of us existed, aligned by a desire that no longer needed words. Sweat slowly trickled down, washing away the weight of old doubts. Each movement felt like breaking a secret, a forgotten routine, and creating space for the new. Trevor's eyes sought mine in the dark, as if asking for confirmation, and I reciprocated, saying yes with my gaze, with my whole body. Time seemed elastic, sometimes racing, sometimes stopping, while our bodies conversed. In another language, Trevor's fingers were maps, traversing unknown roads, revealing unexplored territories. Every sigh, every shiver, every pause filled with anticipation was a silent answer to the question that had hung between us for so long. In the end, lying, side by side, breaths uneven, hands still intertwined, I felt whole. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a stranger in the world. Trevor turned slightly, kissed my shoulder, and murmured, as if revealing a secret, "I just wanted this, just this, and it's not a small thing." There, in the dark of early morning, I understood that that night wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning of a story I never thought I'd have the courage to write. Dawn arrived, carrying an unprecedented peace. The smell of brewed coffee in the kitchen mingled with the warmth of Trevor's body still nestled on the couch. We didn't exchange grand declarations. He stretched, let out a smile like someone with nothing left to hide, and went straight to the kitchen to make toast, as if it were already an old routine. The morning silence was comfortable, complete. Every gesture of his, setting out cutlery, sharing an extra slice of bread, commenting on the news, seemed like a silent invitation to occupy that space together. I sat there watching. Everything was new, but at the same time so natural that I wondered how I had lived so long without it. Between sips of coffee, we exchanged meaningful glances, silly comments about the new reality show, jokes about our messy backpacks thrown in the living room, plans to finally finish assembling the bookshelf. There was no need to talk about the night before. It was all in our gestures, the lightness, the almost shy smiles. Messages started coming in early. Trevor's friends called him for a barbecue. For a moment, I feared he'd disappear, that everything would revert, as if nothing had happened. But he picked up his phone, looked at me, and said quietly, before leaving, "Don't disappear today. I'll be back for lunch. I like your company." The world seemed less threatening after that night. I found the strength to tend to the garden, put on a new playlist, even tidy the room, as if preparing the house was a way of preparing my heart. It wasn't long before Trevor returned, as promised. We shared lunch, laughed at botched recipes, gambled over who'd do the dishes. The silent intimacy grew. A bump in the hallway, a knowing smile on the porch, hands seeking each other under the table. It wasn't euphoria or anxiety. It was an almost unprecedented tranquility. A contentment that only those who've spent too long in fear can recognize. At the end of that week, we walked through the neighborhood together. Trevor talked about places he wanted to visit, trips he dreamed of taking. I listened, laughing at his wild ideas, feeling that, perhaps for the first time, I could belong in someone's future. There were no grand plans, no impossible promises, just a simple certainty that now I no longer needed to be afraid to show myself. From that day on, old doubts seemed smaller. The fears didn't disappear, but together, they seemed easier to face. We didn't talk about what we were. We didn't need to. It was enough to look at the messy couch, the forgotten cups in the sink, the messages exchanged in the middle of the afternoon. The answer was there, in the details of everyday life, in the gestures that, little by little, reinvented our routine. And at night, alone again, I allowed myself to remember every touch, every confession whispered in the dark, the smiles exchanged, as if promising to stay, even if just for one more day. It was then I realized, after so long trying to fit into others' worlds, maybe finally, I had found a place that was mine, built with silence, courage, desire, and, most importantly, mutual choice. The story was still unclear, full of questions, but it no longer needed urgent answers. For now, it was enough to know that by Trevor's side, I could be more myself than anywhere else in the world. The weekend arrived carrying that gentle feeling that good things, when they happen, make time melt away. After so many days living in the shadow of fears, now each sunrise felt less threatening. I already knew when Trevor was near even before seeing him, just by the smell of his deodorant mixed with the aroma of toast wafting from the kitchen. Our home, once divided by fences and missed connections, was now also an intertwining of silent routines, easy laughter, and understanding glances. But no one prepared us for the questions that come after, what now? When the dust settles, when desire turns into affection, you have to decide what to do with the empty space that remains. On Friday, while washing the dishes from the lunch we shared, Trevor got a call. The expression on his face changed from relaxed to something more serious. He hung up quickly, put his phone back in his pocket. I noticed, in the way he lightly bit his lip, that something different was in the air. He was a bit off that afternoon. I tried to joke around, suggested a bike ride or a random movie, but Trevor said he needed to sort some family stuff. Maybe he'd spend the weekend out of town. He didn't explain details, just dropped the last-minute plans on the table. The old anxiety hit, the fear that all of this had been a short dream, that it would now be forgotten in the silence of neighboring houses. As he packed his backpack, throwing shirts and a pair of pants into the outer pocket, the sound of the zippers seemed louder than it should have. I stood in the bedroom doorway, not daring to ask if he'd come back, if this was just a brief disconnection or the first crack in something so new. He noticed my hesitation, tossed his backpack onto the bed, came closer, and gently pulled me into a hug. We stood there, pressed against each other, feeling each other's chests rise and fall. I smelled his cologne, light, familiar. "I'll be back, okay?" he whispered, his lips almost touching my ear. "You don't need to worry. I just need to see my parents, sort some things out. I'll be here Monday." I nodded, holding back the urge to ask him to stay. I was afraid of time, of what it usually does to fragile relationships, still unnamed and undefined. Trevor, always braver, looked me in the eyes and smiled, with that look that understands what silence hides. The goodbye was without drama, just a lingering kiss at the door, hands squeezing a little tighter than usual. He walked through the gate, cast one last glance over his shoulder. I watched until he turned the corner. The emptiness of the house embraced me, but it was a different kind of emptiness. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was longing. And longing, I realized, only truly hurts when you hope for a reunion. I found myself smiling at the mugs in the sink, the smell of his shampoo clinging to the pillow, the pair of flip-flops forgotten near the couch. On Sunday I got a text, that simple thing. "Arriving tomorrow afternoon. Missing you already." He didn't promise anything beyond his return, as if saying, "I'm trying to learn to stay too." Monday came slowly, the sky a bit gray, the smell of approaching rain in the distance. I spent the day anxious, pretending to work while my mind spun, in circles. When I heard the gate, my heart pounded. Trevor arrived tired, hair messy, and eyes shining with longing. He walked in without asking permission, dropped his backpack in the living room, and came to hug me. A long, intense embrace, the kind that says more than any words. We just stayed there for a few minutes, feeling each other's presence, in no hurry to end the moment. "I kept thinking about you the whole time," Trevor said, his voice muffled. "How strange it is to come back and feel like the right place is here, near you." I smiled, a little awkwardly, but inside everything made sense. We didn't talk about the future, commitments, or routines. We just let our days meet again, one step at a time. From that day on, life slowly unfolded, as it should. Trevor didn't move into my room, nor I into his. We continued in separate houses, routines intertwining, but now choosing, every day, the effort to remain. Improvised dinners, movies interrupted by conversations, nights we slept together, and others where each of us was by ourselves. Perhaps the most beautiful thing was realizing that we didn't need to label anything. There was already a kind of unspoken understanding between us, an unannounced intimacy made of small gestures. The way he'd stick notes on my things. "Remember to drink water. Back for dinner. It's cold. Wear a coat." The care he took to make coffee before leaving early. The messages that arrived in the middle of the day just to ask if I was okay. Sometimes, we'd catch ourselves planning trips that might never happen, talking about cities we'd like to visit, trails to hike, movies to watch together. It wasn't the promise of an impossible future. It was just the desire to create memories together, to slowly build a shared space, And, even on days when doubt returned, will he stay? What if he gets tired of me? The answer was in the small choices. Trevor didn't need to say he'd stay. He just had to come back. And I, opening my front door, knew I had done the same. Remained. The night he returned, we were sitting in the backyard, sharing a cold pizza on our laps. I looked at him, his face lit by the soft porch light, and thought of everything we had lived since that first dip in the pool. I felt a mix of gratitude, relief, and a gentle desire to continue, slowly, exactly like this. "Do you think this is enough?" I asked, almost unintentionally, my voice clear, without guilt. He smiled, and it was the most honest smile I'd ever seen. "For me, it's everything. And for you?" It took me a second to answer. I felt the cold wind on my skin, the smell of wet leaves. I looked into his eyes and knew that, for the first time in my life, I didn't need anything more than this. For me too. Much more than I ever imagined. So, in the simplicity of a Sunday night, we decided to continue. Without promises, without guarantees, but with the courage to stay. And deep down, that's all we needed. When I close my eyes and remember everything that's happened in the last few months, I feel like I'm telling someone else's story. But it's all true. Every silence, every doubt, every hesitant touch by the pool, every sleepless night waiting for a sign. It wasn't easy to get here. It wasn't simple to allow myself to live something different. But looking back, I'm grateful for every uncertain step. Living alongside Trevor taught me that we don't always need grand gestures to change our lives. Sometimes it's in the kindness of the details that we realize we are, in fact, moving in another direction. The way he makes space for my silence, how he learns to respect my boundaries, how he includes me in the chaotic world that is his life. All of this built new confidence in me. I, who always feared ending up alone, now understand that being alone isn't the worst thing. The worst would be not allowing yourself to try. Loving someone, even in secret, even with fear, is already a gigantic step. And if there's reciprocity on the other side, then an unlikely safe harbor will be born there. Don't have all the answers. I don't know how long I'll stay in this neighborhood, if Trevor and I will live together, if our travel plans will materialize. I only know that where there used to be only doubt, now there is possibility. I don't think so much about labels, or other people's opinions. What matters is our tacit agreement to go, together, discovering what truly makes sense. We still have our disagreements, we still mess up small things. But today, when he holds my hand walking through the backyard gate, my heart calms. I don't expect grandiosity, just the constancy of small gestures, a shared coffee, a song playing in the background, a note left on the fridge. Sometimes I look back and realize how many moments I let slip away out of fear of trying. If I could give my old self advice, it would be, it's okay not to know what comes next. It's okay to need time. What's not okay is closing the door to what could be great precisely because it seems small. Now I understand that every relationship is a daily construction. There's no perfect moment, no ready-made right person for us. There's choice. And today, I choose Trevor. I choose to be here, with my doubts and my desire to learn to love again. When I think about the future, I see only an open field ahead, trails to discover. I don't need to rush. If it's meant to work out, it will be in our own time. And, honestly, I've never liked the idea of walking slowly so much. If this story resonated with you in some way, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to follow the next chapters. Here, every new story is an invitation to understand that every possibility deserves to be lived, even if just for one more day. Thanks for listening. And who knows, maybe the next story I tell will be inspired by you. See you soon.